you. Good afternoon. Thank you all for coming to Ascend. I'm Rob Meyerson. I'm the moderator for this. It's the 6th Space Founders Panel. We actually had the first one at IAC in 2019 in preparation for creating Ascend, so that's why there's 6. I was on the founding team of Ascend and had the opportunity to shape what it's become. We created a new platform focused on building our off-world future and creating outcomes that will make the first objective a reality and attracting adjacent industries to the conversation. We wanted Ascend to be founder-friendly, and so one way to make it so is to hold conversations with founders, like I have on the stage today, in a relaxed setting. And our goal is to provide the audience with insights into how to start a new company or organization, and we also want an opportunity for our founders to learn from each other. And so over the years, we've had some amazing founders like Cam Ghaffarian, Ariel Ekbla, Sarah Spangalo, Andy Lapsa, and Carissa Christensen on the stage here with me. And so I'm really excited to have these three here with me today. So let's get started. I'd like each panelist, starting with Nicole Wagner here, to provide your name and your company and a short bio summary of your business. And then we'll go down to Thomas Zurbuchen and Sir Martin Sweeting.
Wonderful. Well, thank you very much for having me here today, Rob. For those who don't know me, my name is Nicole Wagner. I am the president and CEO of a Yukon spinoff company called LambdaVision. And what LambdaVision is doing is we are developing a protein-based artificial retina to help patients that are blinded by end-stage retinal degenerative diseases. So diseases like retinitis pigmentosa, which is the leading cause of heritable blindness, and then the much larger market of macular degeneration, which I'm sure many of you are familiar with. This is the leading cause of blindness for people 55 and older. My background, I have a PhD in molecular biology, where I've worked on optimizing light-activated proteins for device architectures. So in addition to this artificial retina, I've worked on things like photovoltaics, chemical sensors, holography, and now, certainly my focus has been on this artificial retina. I'll talk a little bit more about it, but the unique thing that brings me here to Ascend is also that we are manufacturing this artificial retina on the International Space Station. So we have flown 9 missions to the International Space Station so far. We have many more planned, and we are thinking about ways that we can actually commercialize technology by leveraging microgravity for the manufacturing process. So super cool stuff. And certainly I'll talk a little bit more about this, but I did not start off as a NASA engineer or an engineer at all. And so this has been a windy path in how I got to founding LambdaVision and working in space. Thanks.
Thank you, Nicole. Yeah.
Hey, I'm Thomas Zurbuchen, and one of the hardest decisions I took almost 25 years ago, actually almost 18 years ago or so, is whether or not I do my startup or I help other startups. And what I decided, I was working for Google at that time as a consultant working on space imaging. We had a lot of great ideas, often following your footsteps, you're going to talk about. But I decided, looking around me, I was in the state of Michigan at that point, and when I got to that, it was around 2006, 2007. Instead of starting my company, which I had money already for, basically what I'll do, I said, is I'll start a center that really grows entrepreneurship. This is where the state of Michigan had 15% unemployment, and everybody was really looking at the university with its leading aerospace programs and so forth, and other programs as to, what could you do for the economy around you. So I started that center, kind of made a little bit. We went with big ambitions, and we became the #1 program in entrepreneurship education in the country. It took roughly a little bit less, 8 years until the first kind of $1 billion exit happened in that environment. That, of course, is not because of just one person. Nobody should think that. I certainly don't want to communicate that. What I'm going to talk about later in this panel is I'm trying to do it again on a different continent now, and just kind of see how you do that in Central Europe. I joined a university. I thought I could do it in 3 years, either be successful or fail in 3 years. So I'm doing it in half the time or less. So I have experiences with that. My PhD is in astrophysics, But I spent most of my time after 10 years of a research and teaching career really leading organizations, including NASA science program for 6.5 years or so.
Mm-hmm. Thank you, Thomas.
Well, I've just given a little bit of a talk about the background, so I won't inflict that on you again, but just to say that I formed a company way back in the Jurassic period, 1985, when startups were really pretty well unheard of. It was a university spin-out and without any money. Mm-hmm. And so that process over the last 40 years of taking a startup from nothing with no money in a topic which everybody said was going to be a waste of time through to today has been quite an interesting experience. Mm-hmm. And so I'd be very happy to share some of the experiences and lessons learned. But just by background, for those of you that may not have heard the previous talk, I have basically two jobs. Having formed a company, Surrey Satellite Technology in '85, I'm the executive chairman of that, but I'm also a professor at the University of Surrey Space Centre, both in the United Kingdom. My background originally is in RF engineering, but I sort of mutated into space engineering because that's a very interesting multidisciplinary topic, and since then have really focused on small satellites, which I guess now is sort of comes under the generic term, not an ideal term, but it's a good abbreviation of new space.
I usually create the panel from the awardee for the Thompson Lecture, of course, Sir Martin, congratulations, and then pick other people who I know peripherally or respect. And what's interesting in listening to you is all three of you founded organizations that came out of universities or were affiliated with universities. And I think that's important for others to know. It's a real way to create a new company with the backing or within the shadow of a university. And I think that's important as we talk more through the steps today. Why don't we let's talk about funding and sponsorship, in that case. And what was it like when you started your company? Let's start with Nicole. Certainly the funding environment now is different. It's venture capital is sort of the big thing, but Nicole and then Thomas and then Sir Martin, let's hear your stories about that. So.
Sure. So funding is always a fun story to tell, right? It's a lot of banging on doors. But coming out of a university, right? So for me, the obvious source of funding starting a biotech company that's doing primarily R&D was to start with government research grants. So the story I often tell people is I applied for my very first SBIR as soon as I graduated. For those of you who know how NIH works, it starts off by having significance, approach, environment, team, and you get ranked on all of those, and that gives you your score. So my very first grant that I submitted, I put in there, about the artificial retina. We got great scores on significance, innovation, approach, environment, but when it came down to the team, it was one of the lowest scores. And I submitted this as a PhD, a PI, just recent graduate. And of course, after I got that score, I kind of went home and had my little pity party of, oh my gosh, this is so terrible. How can we get so many scores and there's no trust and confidence in me? And as a very early graduate, what I was neglecting to put into my proposal was that it isn't about just me, right? I put the proposal in as me as the PI, but actually it was the team of people that I work with that I neglected to put on that proposal and to fit that into certain sections of my proposal. So it wasn't me starting the company. It was also, I had lawyers, I had regulatory consultants, I had surgeons, I had PhD faculty, all that were kind of supporting this company. And so now when I submit grants, that's one of the highest scores that we get as the team. And we get dinged on other things, the innovation, the approach, the ways that we're trying to do things. But so the very first company, or the very first funding into our company was government research grants through an SBIR through NIH. We then got some NSF funding and some small state funding, which was in the form of a pre-seed kind of a note to get us up off the ground. And that was really important for us because while these government grants are awesome, they're non-dilutive, they often can be very restrictive in how you use the funds. So by partnering with, in this case it was the state of Connecticut, we got some funding from CT Innovations, Connecticut Innovations. That allowed us to do some of the things outside of the grant in terms of business development to really move the company forward. So fast forward, since the time the company was founded, we have a little bit of almost $14 million of non-dilutive funding into the company, with the largest funder there being NASA as a huge supporter for some of the in-space manufacturing work. And then most recently, we closed on a seed round, which was supported by, in this case, we worked with the Aurelia Foundry Fund, was one of our lead investors here. And so that really helped us in terms of catalyzing the R&D commercialization activity that we need to do to really get us to the steps of the clinic. So outside of the R&D work that some of these government grants have been funding. So a bit of a non-traditional approach. I think a lot of people like to think about grants as one strategy, but to be funded by grants for so long, we are really grateful for the investor capital now because it allows us to move a little bit faster. And allows us to do some of the things that the government grants wouldn't necessarily allow us to do.
Thank you. Yep.
So, in my work in various places, I've observed a lot of people raising money and have done it myself in many different areas. And kind of my suggestion would be, or kind of my observation has been that it's a really important skill set. As a founder, it's an existential skill set. Not everybody needs equal amount of money, but you need to be able to explain your ideas in a way that others want to be part of it. Even if it's not by giving money, if they want to, it's like, hey, and for me, it's more like the way many people think about raising money. It's more, they think of it as like asking for something. For me, getting money is more a partnership. Going together on a journey to reach something, a goal that otherwise we cannot reach. And so kind of when I started the Center for Entrepreneurship, kind of with that idea, it took me 2 weeks for all the funding. And frankly, my biggest challenge was, here's like, okay, how much does it cost? Like $2 million, okay, here it is. It's like, okay, wait, how do I make sure, like sometimes what I've observed, not just with my organizations, but elsewhere, if you have too much money too early, which is not a problem most people have right now, by the way. But if you have too much money too early, I've observed many who had that, it's like a fruit platter on a hot summer day. A lot of flies come. It's not good for the fruit, right? It's like, it really is a challenge. So the question just really is, kind of that discipline of being cheap early on, I think, is a really, really important discipline, whether it's SBIR, stretching SBIR money or entry-level venture funds, which of course I've done personally in other organizations. But for me, kind of getting money is far less about some kind of fuel for the car. It's really about partnership to build the car together. Kind of in a profound fashion. And by the way, that's what I'm observing now. Companies who are kind of the approach to that part really, I think it's yes, the idea matters tremendously. Yes, the team matters tremendously, but the approach to fundraising is a really important element, I think, in the success metrics of these.
Mm-hmm. That's really interesting questions all embedded in this, because first of all, you mentioned universities as being one of the sort of areas where they grow out, and I think this is quite common because the technologies often start out in university research labs. Not always, of course, but quite often. And so it's that synergy between universities and industry that's important, but also really quite difficult to make happen. You have to work hard at it. But when it can work, that synergy can be really powerful. I liked the point that you made, Thomas, about not having too much money. Because I think looking back, and although it was a different time when I started, it wasn't there weren't the large number of startups, and venture capital was very different. The best thing that happened to me, I think, was the then Prime Minister, Margaret Thatcher, cancelled the UK space programme and any government funding for space in the way that we were talking other than space science. And that meant that there was no other path. It had to be through some sort of commercial activity in order to fund it. And we started with no money. And the first thing that I did was to go out and talk to what were then considered venture capitalists, only to discover that venture was a misnomer. They were looking for a short-term, almost guaranteed response. And so we took the option to grow a company organically. And the advantage of that is that you maintain control over the direction that you think you should take, for good or ill. On the other hand, the disadvantage is that it's a very slow process because you're just reinvesting gradually, but you have complete freedom. Now, times are different today, and I sit on a number of curiously, investment boards now on the other side of the table, and so I see opportunities being brought and then seeing how they can develop. And I think there is this very delicate balance between having enough money from the funding source to be able to make progress, but not so much that you, shall we say, squander it. You use, if every pound or every euro or every dollar counts, you will be very imaginative how you do it, and that will reflect itself in the way the business itself goes. So my recommendation, and it was quite funny, because we had a number of delegations from other countries that came and said, well, to Surrey in the 1990s and 2000s, said, well, this is very interesting. How do you do it? What do you recommend? And I said, get your government to cut your funding. Yeah. Because by doing that, by being hungry, you will innovate. And that was not a popular recommendation.
Yeah. Thomas is, let's not go there yet.
I joke, but there is a grain in there that don't have too much money.
I agree. When we first met, you won't remember this, it was probably 20 years ago at IAC, and the Australians had sent a team of engineers to Surrey to learn how to build satellites. And I remember the young engineer who was there. It was like FedSat program, if you remember. And so that going from startup and very sort of, everything's tight and frugal, and then you have other countries, friendly countries coming and saying, we want to learn from you, and deciding to do that is kind of interesting, almost like we've arrived kind of a moment. I'm sure you didn't really think of it that way, but how did that feel for you? So,
I'm not sure if Stockton really thought about it. One of the most interesting things was that with all the countries that we partnered with, we learned as much from them.
Yeah.
Not just in terms of their technology, but also their thinking, their culture, because they approach problems in a very different way than the British will sort of sit there like this and do it. Having other cultures coming in, it broadened our thinking. That also reflected itself in the business. It tended to be a much more flexible, I'd like to think imaginative business because of it.
Thomas, did you want to say something about cutting funding? Did you ever ask for that?
Well, look, the difference between entrepreneurs and those who are not, or true innovators and those who are not, is that true innovators and entrepreneurs understand the value of constraints as power for new thought. So if you go into a room and said, what is the best way we could get the most creative ideas? The people who've never done this, they're saying, no constraints whatsoever, just try with the best crazy idea that what you come up with these kind of ideas is some kind of weird rococo. Architecture before was perfectly fine. You just started adding crap on it, like little loops, and so it becomes something that's overloaded and not beautiful. Kind of constraints, whether it's schedule constraints, whether it's funding constraints, whether it's technology constraints. I personally love schedule constraints, and I wish kind of mea culpa after NASA is like, hey, I should have used it even more. Kind of my instinct were they were more important than often money constraints, and so for me those constraints are really, really powerful. So I'm not I don't want to advocate for necessarily for cutting money, but for me okay, so how do you make sure that actually you get entrepreneurs, actual innovators, to do things? So the goal is not to do a kind of a crappy version of the status quo, The goal is to do something new, and constraints help you do that. Because you take the status quo off the table. And you did that beautifully. I mean, I always felt that kind of in many ways you're the quintessential kind of entrepreneur from that perspective in your domain, because you created a whole domain around that thought. It's like, no, we're not going to do the big satellites. We're going to do it differently. We're going to use a different approach. And by doing so, we can serve other customers, right? That is one constraint. There are other constraints that people use. For example, in the launch market, like how fast is a turnaround, like time between launches, kind of make that the measure, as opposed to kind of tweaking every last thing on one rocket. Kind of that is creating new thoughts. So that's what came to my mind. I'm interested. You just raised money for your company. Do you want to tell us how that went?
I want to tell you about it. I just want to follow up on the constraints thing, because Nicole, I think if you had, money's obviously constrained. You went 0 to 1 with LambdaVision, but if you had unlimited access to space, like on any given day you could send a payload up and you had all the crew time and everything that you wanted, how would that change your business? Would that be revolutionary? Would that be, what other things would step up? And do you ever think about those scenarios?
Daily. For us, there are certain things that money can speed up, right? You might be able to have more access. You might be able to do things in parallel. You might be able to hire more people. Maybe you could fail a little faster or succeed faster. I think for us, sometimes the constraints that we have, right? If you told me today, Nicole, I'm going to give you $100 million. Can you get this artificial retina on the market in a year? The constraints I have are like animal breeding, like things that you wouldn't even think about. The fact that I have to do these animal studies, those are regulated certain time frames. Then, I have a 3-month study, a 6-month study, a 9-month study. All of these things play into the constraints that I have to deal with on a regular basis that, money wouldn't necessarily speed up. So that's something I think about often. To the point about constraints on the team side, I mentioned early on when I started this about the ding scores I had on my team. And so one of the things I thought about very early on is everybody wants me to have this huge team. How do I build a team with no money? And that's really scary when you're first coming out of school and you're talking to consultants and they're saying this is $200 an hour, $500 an hour for the expert. But I think one of the jobs as a CEO is to find out what makes people tick. Not everybody is going to be motivated by money, right? So for the intern working for you, maybe it's a letter of recommendation. For the retinal surgeon, maybe they have plenty of money and they want to be the first to be able to insert this into the eye. For the regulatory consultant, maybe their mother has macular degeneration and they just want to see this come to market. And so for us, in the very beginning, we used a lot of those creative strategies. And I think a warning sign that I would advise, or at least put out there, is that if somebody, the very first time you meet them, they're like, I'm not going to talk to you unless you give me X dollars, at least in the early entrepreneurship phase, when you're starting your company, that's probably not somebody you want to work on your team, right? Because they're not motivated. You need to really have skin in the game in the very beginning. It's a passion project to get it off the ground. You may not be flush with capital. So I think when you start to see people that are motivated for other reasons than just financial reasons, you will be able to move and deal with a lot of those constraints that were mentioned earlier on.
Yeah, that's such a great point. And you're right. The role of the CEO is to attract talent in using whatever tools and resources that you have. So go ahead. Yeah.
I mean, just picking up on that, because it's a really interesting point.
Yep.
I mean, certainly, I welcome people who have real passion and interest in the business. And that is essential. I mean, satellites don't build themselves. People build satellites, for example. So we need to have people who have that focus and motivation. On the other hand, they also need to have financial awareness, because one of the problems I have a cadre of people who are really, really enthusiastic engineers, and it's difficult to get them to, at the same time, bound that with the financial realities, and not just financial, but time scale as well. Yeah. So you need this balance of people who are really motivated, really interested, really imaginative, but are aware of what the realities of life are around it.
Very, very much so. Thomas, to get to your question about me, I founded Interlune in 2020. We came out of stealth this year, so this is the first time I'm doing this as the CEO of Interlune, which is kind of fun. Interlune's based in Seattle. We're focused on harvesting natural resources from space, starting with the moon and helium-3. We're built on the belief and the conviction that the Artemis program is here to stay, and that the infrastructure being developed by NASA for Artemis to deliver large and small cargo and lunar rovers and communication and power networks to the moon will provide us with competitive sources that we can buy as services. And that allows us to focus money from private investors on harvesters and equipment to excavate and extract and bring space resources back to Earth. Every time you get into something like this, investors ask questions like, what kind of team do you have? We have a great team. We have Harrison Schmitt, from Apollo 17, the only geologist to walk on the moon. We have Gary Lai, who I've worked with since the Kistler days and was the chief architect at Blue Origin. Indra Hornsby, who I've known for almost 10 years now. She was the head of Corp Dev at Rocket Lab and also at Spaceflight. We have a great team, but they also ask, what have you learned since you started this? First off, they said, well, isn't that just about fusion? And that's a two-miracle business plan, and I don't want anything to do with it. But what have you learned? And our biggest surprise coming in, after spending a year studying this market and talking to customers, is the future growing demand for helium-3 for quantum computing, for superconducting quantum computing. And these superconducting quantum computers, which are not on every desk yet, far from it, but they, the investment is continuing and the growth is happening in a sort of a predictable fashion. And when we reach what's called quantum supremacy, the demand for quantum computers will grow, and the demand for helium-3 will grow along with it, with that certain archetype, the superconducting quantum computing. The supply chain has no idea where they're going to get it from. It has come historically from the decay of tritium, and so that's the story that we tell. And the moon has helium-3, 1.1 million metric tons of helium-3, and so that's the story we tell. The key for our first year of fundraising was, call me when you get a lead investor. And you probably heard this, Nicole, and I'm sure everyone has. Yeah, I'm interested, but call me when you have a lead investor. And it took us a while to find the right group. We found 776, which is Alexis Ohanian's investment group. He is a founder of Reddit. He invests in tech, he invests in content, he invests in space, and he's been a great supporter of what we're doing. And once we had them in, everything else lined up very, very quickly. We were able to close within 60 days after, getting their check. Far from easy, but it's also a very bold business plan. So one that, still a lot of people don't believe in, but for a number of reasons, but not always the same. So you have to kind of tease that out when you're fundraising and talking to those investors, or just like, when you are talking to any group about getting support. You got to tease out what it is that gets them on board. And back to Nicole's last comment, even when you're hiring people, you got to tease out what's going to bring them in. So let's talk about scaling as well. So every company, starts from small, from a group of founders, 1, 2, 3, 4, whatever. And the objective is not always to stay small, it's to grow. Talk to me about the challenges you've seen with growth, and not just with growing people, but growing processes and growing the organization to address this. Does anyone want to take that one first?
Well,
yeah.
Well, I've sort of got 4 decades of various stages which I can reflect on this since we formed SSTL. First of all, when you're sort of the 0 to 20 grouping of people, has a certain flavor. Then you go to 50, and it's slightly different, 100, and you start to find that you have to have processes in place, and it's not the same, communications is not so straightforward. Then you go to the 300, 400, and then it goes on. Each of those is a gear change in the way the company works, and it's quite a challenge. And quite often I've noticed that when I've observed other companies, it's that change which is the most difficult thing to manage, at the same time as maintaining innovation and agility and so forth. And I think actually the Romans got it about right. That the centurion, 100 people, is about the most efficient number of people that you can interact with in an efficient way without having a burdensome communications. But then you need to have an equation which not only takes that into account, but it takes your product into account and the infrastructure you need to support that. And so that will modulate then what size of company you want. Now for SSTL, we're an upstream company. We manufacture satellites. That's a very capital intensive, a part of the business. And again, I've sort of had the company grow right the way up to 600 people, where I found that actually innovation suffered, communications got too rigid. So we deliberately let that breathe in. The most efficient time was when we were about 250, but that didn't cope with a sufficient turnover annually to be able to afford all the infrastructure. We've now settled on roughly 350 to 400 as being about the optimum of having enough activities to fund all the infrastructure we need, have enough business so that we're not dependent on just one contract, and yet everybody pretty well knows each other, and the lines of communication and the management of the people is still manageable.
I find that transition to be really difficult, both in my own experience, but also observing it in others. And you're quite unusual in many ways, because you've taken a company from a size where you fit in one meeting room with a table that's small, to the numbers that you just said, or bigger, right? Kind of if you look at kind of how big the company has been at different times in history. And it turns out that there is the kind of quintessential startup entrepreneur or kind of innovator often is super good kind of for the first 20, 100 people. And kind of there's a way to achieve that. That is quite destructive after the 100, like from 100 to 1,000 to 10,000. It's quite hard to do. And frankly, it's kind of interesting. It's kind of what's heartbreaking to observe and sometimes hard for people to experience is even though they really have the best in mind for the unit that they're growing, frankly, they're the wrong people to kind of take it up. Because kind of the natural instinct, which is this kind of almost mother-hen instinct, like I'm in charge, like I'm protecting the team, and I'm at the same time I'm attacking and I defend, like that kind of, does not work for many people. Now, I think fair to say there are different leadership styles that, and then kind of sometimes we go to business schools and people tell us like, this is the right leadership styles. Like the more you observe, the more you realize there are really different ways of organizing, especially look internationally. There's different ways of organizing teams and leadership. But for me, it's that transition. It's really a time of tremendous instability. That's also often we're kind of a higher series, kind of you're done with seed funds or pre-seed funds, and now you're getting into a Series A and so forth. And kind of at that transition, often there's pressure from the outside, sometimes undue pressure that is not actually correct, but kind of just because people have scars on their backs because of experiences like that. So yeah, I've experienced that, personally. There are times where I had to where I felt it was important to take myself out, just because my style kind of had its downsides, and I observed the downsides grow kind of in the organization, and have to have the humility for that. What I always needed, is a good kind of personal set of mentors who tell me those things. be careful, you're doing X. And so for me, I think if you're the startup entrepreneur, that would be my most important, advice. Make sure you have outside people who really care for you and your company, but care so much that they're honest with you about your weaknesses. That's the kind of people that you need around you. And if you can overcome that, even if you're turning from CEO to CTO, or what an amazing thing, because kind of the core of the company is still yours.
Yeah.
You birthed it, you brought it there, but and there are the few that can take it forward just like you have, and create an amazing kind of history-making venture, kind of without that transition, but with a lot of learning on the way.
I think what's interesting for me, we're still a pretty small team. We have 6 full-time. We're probably going to bring on 3 or 4 more people with the new funding that we just raised. But watching my role evolve, right? So when I started, I was in the lab. I'm a scientist by training. I was doing a lot of the R&D. I was involved in every discussion. Every time we had a team meeting, it was all 3 or 4 of us on every single call. And now we've kind of had to separate and segregate our roles a little bit, just because we have so much going on that you can't be involved with everything, right? And my role in the very early days was very much in the R&D side. Now it's been more on the stakeholder management kind of side. And how do I reach more investors? How do I continue to build our partnerships? And what are we going to do to grow? And not everybody can do that. I mean, we have people that I've said, hey, this would be great for you. And they're like, no, I want to be just on the science. That's the side. And so to recognize your strengths and weaknesses and where you feel most comfortable is really, really important. So I would say that's one thing for me that I observe. The other thing that money can buy, so when you're a very small team, as the CEO, you wear 1,000 hats, right? I was the accountant, I was the, person reviewing legal, I was, the person doing every, NDA and those kind of things. And then as you get funding, I'm like, all right, I'm going to send this to the lawyer. I'm going to send, and that's the right, that's the right way to do it when you have the money and capital to do it. Also, it's just faster, right? I mean, there are times where we were trying to make templates for things. There are templates out there that somebody surely made, and you can buy them or you can hire that person, and the efficiency, maybe they're a little bit more expensive, but the efficiency and the time that you could be spending to build your business versus hiring, somebody else on board that has already done this before, I think is something that you need to recognize too. And that's something that in the very early stages, when you're really capital constrained, you're trying to do it all. But as you raise capital and you have a little bit more or less restriction there, that's where I would say really think about what your core expertise is, and then don't be afraid to hire out, because it will help things move faster and it frees you up to do the things that you're really good at.
Mm-hmm. All great points. Yeah. As I'm listening, I'm thinking about growth stages, and when I was at Blue Origin, the days that when you first got to the point where you're walking past someone and you don't know who they are, and your first, your inkling is to sort of turn your head and just, maybe say good morning, but and I had to resist that and stop them and say, hey, haven't met you yet. I'm Rob, and introduce myself. When the company goes from those different sizes of the sort of the family to the community to large corporation kind of feeling where people just don't know each other and they work together but don't really know each other. You want to try to find a way to continue the beginnings part of that as far as you can. And I agree. I think the size 250, 300, is really ideal, but it really depends on what you're building. For Nicole, it's probably a little bit smaller, would be ideal. And, for a company doing satellites, it might be around 250, and then for a company building rockets and lunar landers and everything under the sun, it's going to be a little bit bigger. So, yeah. One of our prior panelists, also before I go on, we are going to take Q&A in about 6-7 minutes, so scan that QR code and you can submit your questions and we'll take those. One of our prior panelists was Cam Ghaffarian, and one of the books he recommended that I read is called Blitzscaling. and it's how the tech industry scales. It's written by Reid Hoffman, the founder of LinkedIn. I think maybe SpaceX sort of lived through this sort of the super fast growth period, but how tech companies do it, and talks about those ideal sizes and where communications break down and what kind of tools to put in place, but also the idea of recruiting and you going from 6 or 8 people around a table, grilling a candidate, having them do pseudocode on a whiteboard, to getting to the point where, oh, you went to this school and you work for this company, we're going to kind of count on the fact that you can do this, and then we're going to evaluate you for fit, which is a very different approach than what I was raised on, and something I'm kind of curious about as we kind of grow. And it's just an interesting way of thinking about things, and it's how Reid has shared his ideas for how they've grown companies, going from 100 to 10,000 in a year, which is certainly doable, just not real easy. So okay, let's talk about fun stories, and every startup has them, and tell us about some things that maybe you didn't expect were going to happen, maybe an anecdote you can share with the crowd that you feel comfortable with. So it can be about anything. So Thomas, one I think the story from Eric Berger's book is a pretty fun one from when you were at Michigan, and I know you back then too, so it was fun to hear your perspective on things. So
it was a unexpected story. I was asked by one of the big magazines to write about workforce in aerospace. I built that entrepreneurship center, but also came from the space side, and I was had one of the first kind of internationally, frankly, educational programs that are focused on entrepreneurial space. And of course, SpaceX was growing. This was before they were successful with all their rockets. And what I did to write that article, just because I didn't know how to do it, I just basically said, I wonder in the last 10 years who are the people who really walked on water, like the best students I ever had in my classroom, the top 10. I went and looked at all records, and I came with a list of people, and then I found them where they were. 5 of them were at SpaceX. Only 2 of them were directly hired into it. No other organization had more than one of the heroes, right? Kind of, as I might call them. And so I basically asked, why did you do that? And they all talked, and frankly, it wasn't about money, turned out. Almost basically nothing to do with money. It had everything to do with vision. And so I wrote this article that basically said, look, what I wrote, I got a lot of flack for, by the way, early on, but I wrote the article that basically said SpaceX is going to be successful if they're not running out of money first, because they have the best talent in the country. I actually had called many of the other universities also. So took a few days, and I got a call from SpaceX, and basically said, Elon would like to meet you. I thought, he wants to meet me. I did something good. It's like I walked in the door, Elon, after we set it up, he basically said, it's great. Thanks for the article. I liked it so much, I sent it to everybody who works at SpaceX. By the way, you're right. That is correct, what you said. And then he asked me a question, which I thought is going to be about me. It's not what he asked. It's like, hey, where are the other 5? Write the names right here. I'll call them personally, and I'll recruit them. I thought, unexpected. I thought the meeting was about me, but it was not about me. It was recruiting the other 5 of the top 10 for my list. That was really unexpected and fun.
Good question, huh? So, and your goal creating the Center for Entrepreneurship is to create people who think differently. Not just engineers too. I mean, it's creating multidisciplinary thinkers who can thrive in an organization like that. So it has to feel good to be able to kind of see that progress. So
that's exactly right. And if I look around in the industry right now, so many of it's very hard to find a startup that does not have top talent from the program that I was there. Mm-hmm. If we look at, of course, at SpaceX, but many others, and I'm really proud of them.
Yeah.
Because that kind of attitude, and it takes a little bit of an attitude that is not the most humble. An attitude that basically says, I can make an impact. Mm-hmm. I'm such a strong believer that people really see themselves as a person who can make potential impact because of who they are And really finding that and daring to try. I mean, that really is what I'm a strong believer in, kind of on the educational side, but also as we grow startups, you know, kind of encouraging people to do that experiment and try something.
Mm-hmm. Sir Martin or Nicole, do you want to?
Well, I was trying to think, because there's a long list of entertaining experiences that I've had, some probably not for public consumption and others which probably take too long to explain. But I think perhaps, you know, building on what we've just been saying, I was at the Space Symposium in Colorado Springs, which used to be called the National Space Symposium, I think. And it would have been, and I'm not sure the exact year, but it was around about the year 2000. And I was sort of, you know, one day sitting there, and I got a phone call. And the person else said, look, and it was from an American colleague that I knew. He said, I got this crazy guy. He wants to go to Mars. And he said, you know, he's trying to do this. You know, do you think you'd spare a few minutes to have a chat with him? And I said, yeah, okay. And so I said, yeah, okay. And I agreed to meet up at the Space Symposium and have breakfast. And he said, look, I want to put a greenhouse on Mars because I think NASA, it's before your time, so it's not going to reflect on you. You know, NASA are just too slow and too bogged down.
Still the case. Yeah.
Too bogged down on this, and I want to show how this, you know, we could really make some progress. And the best way to do it is to put a greenhouse on Mars and grow, you know, something there to show that this is possible and do it quickly. You know, are you interested? Because I've been told you're sort of character who will do crazy things. I said, yeah, sure. You know, it's a good challenge. I said, yeah, the greenhouse is a bit of a challenge, the greenhouse bit, but the problem is how you're going to get there. Mm-hmm. This is going to be the biggest problem. And I said, well, you need to think about this. We've been using the Russians for launches. I suggest you go and have a chat with them. See if you can you know, get an affordable launch for your greenhouse. Anyway, he went and had a chat with them. He didn't get on with them very well. And came back. And it turned out it was Elon Musk who had decided, and then from that he said, I'm going to build my own launchers. So it all started in a coffee over a greenhouse on Mars.
Mm-hmm.
Funny.
Nicole, you want to?
Yeah, I guess mine are maybe a little lighter, but you know, sort of the being in the right place, right time kind of story. You know, I think for one of the big questions I always get asked is, how the heck did you get in space? And it isn't because, you know, a lot of the things that we're doing in space, it wasn't that it's impossible to go to space, but it is usually not the most obvious way to say, wake up one morning, I'm having a manufacturing challenge. Maybe going to the ISS is the way to solve it. That is not usually how people think about these things. So for me, the story that I usually share is that I was part of Mass Challenge in 2016. Sitting in a room that has a very like Google type feel. Everybody's in there really, really early. Everybody's staying up late. You know, you're all around the same table kind of thinking and drawing on whiteboards. And I was driving from West Hartford, Connecticut to South Boston, which was a good 2-hour drive. So when I got there in the morning, I planned it around traffic and I was there all day. And so I was sitting at a table and somebody kind of came around and they knocked on the table and they said, hey, Nicole, you know, CASIS, which is the Center for Advancement of Science and Space, Boeing are here. There's free pizza down the hall, and they're one of our sponsors. And so I was like, all right, you know, starving entrepreneur, you go and you're looking for some pizza. You don't really know what you're going to find on the other end. And it was a talk that CASIS was giving about the work that they're doing on the ISS to benefit people on Earth. And at this time in 2016, they were talking about biomanufacturing. There was made in space and, you know, tech shots and those kind of things going on. And it kind of, you know, struck a chord with me and, hey, maybe we can do this on the International Space Station. We joined Mass Challenge because we had some challenges in how we were manufacturing. And so I left that meeting and I called my research advisor and he's like, Nicole, I have a lot of confidence in you, but this is kind of crazy. And I said, no, let me just put something together. So we have the way that we manufacture this, our artificial retina, it takes about the size of a desk. So you can imagine now trying to do this in space. And we have no space experience. I'm Googling Raspberry Pi communication to ISS automation. Like that's how ridiculous this was. And so fast forward, they had another meeting, I joined that meeting, another meeting, I joined that meeting. And at the end, the person who was at CASIS at this time, it was Cindy Bouteau who was there, Jonathan Volk, some of you guys may know them. They came out and they said, you know what, I've seen you 3 times. I think this might work, so let's help you. And so what I realized at the time is that I don't need to be the space manufacturer, you know, the implementation partner. There are people out there that can do that. So they partner with us to handle the communication to the ISS. That was not going to be my problem to solve. But that's really how our whole project got started. And then fast forward, you know, we've now flown 9 missions to the ISS. But it was literally, you know, being in the right place, getting out of your office, and these sort of serendipitous bump into each other type of conversations where, you know, now that's been one of our biggest manufacturing, you know, we're really looking at manufacturing on the ISS, and some of our biggest funding has come from that.
That's fantastic. We have a lot of questions, so I want to cover at least a couple of them. The first one is, like, as founders, where do you see untapped opportunities to start new ventures? In space,
I didn't quite catch it.
Where do you see untapped opportunities to found new ventures?
That's a leading one. I mean, honestly, I think it's going to be in a combination of in-orbit robotics and autonomy. Mm-hmm. I think this is going to be the area which will make a real, say, gear change in how we approach space. So, you know, we see some people starting out in the space debris issues, the in-orbit refueling and so forth. It's just beginning. I think if we combine the opportunities that Starship will provide in terms of huge lift capability on a regular basis, on a more affordable basis, combine that with robotics and automation, then I think that's where the big opportunity lies.
Mm-hmm. I think I agree with that entirely. I just really think that there are entirely new markets opening, new approaches that also change the timing of how quickly you can go to space, because you're not building the whole everything. You deliver to it. I think the second market that I really see opening and is really interesting is frankly focused on Earth observations, kind of at scale. I just really believe that downstream market, and not only is it important, but I think kind of as kind of new data analysis techniques are taking a hold, and kind of many people are seeing it. And, you know, kind of as I talk to segments, you know, I spent part of my time in Zurich, so I know a lot about reinsurance that I didn't know before, right? Kind of like how they're looking at the world. But also many other, you know, entities, both non-for-profits, for-profits. I just really think that downstream market is really growing, and I don't think has enough players in them. I mean, and of course, there's enormous challenges. Many people are trying very hard to make it work. And if the problem is that every one of the it's very hard to find a market that scales. Mm-hmm. Fast, right? Kind of, so you have to kind of, the trick is to scale kind of in depth and breadth to really make big companies, and that's why you need different data analysis techniques that most people have used. But that's a second element.
I'm living it, but I would say, you know, still there's a lot of opportunity in biomanufacturing. I mean, I think one of the risks here for a lot of people is, you know, we're kind of at the forefront, and we're sticking our neck out there and sort of paving the way. But I'd love to see, I mean, I think there's a lot of opportunities for big pharma to get involved and do more research in space. I think we got to kind of change the narrative around that. So space is still very frivolous for many people. The fact that the space station is coming down in 5 or 6 years now, it kind of makes, if you're going in a big business, they're looking at their 5-year plan. So what's the plan after those 5 years when the IS is decommissioned? There's still a lot of uncertainty there. I think as we continue to get more regulatory, refine the regulatory path for biomanufacturing, as we start to think about the teams and building out some of the expertise, the workforce around that, I think there's still a lot of opportunity there. And then have more companies have wins there. I think it will, we'll start to see more of these big pharma companies come on board in doing more research in space.
Yep. It shouldn't be a surprise. I believe the opportunities are on the moon, but I also think that I think investors are going to start to intersect. They're going to invest in intersections between space and climate tech, and I think those intersections are really important in terms of weather prediction, as Thomas said, remote sensing, Earth observation, wildfire monitoring, methane emissions, all these things that pulling those together into a greater kind of a climate solution are going to be really important. I think space is a very important part of that as well. I want to do one more question, and then we're going to do a lightning round. What's one book you would recommend about business or leadership or something else? So, Sir Martin, you want to start?
The Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy, without any doubt, because that provides you with insight, I think, into human behavior at a level which is, I think, quite unique.
Mm-hmm.
So the book that I've most gifted to people is Thinking Fast and Slow. And it's about how you think, make decisions yourself. It's written by Kahneman, the Nobel Prize-winning economist, and kind of allows you, kind of as you look at it, to kind of see in others, but also yourself, where your thinking may be wrong, especially when it's under pressure or otherwise. So it's a book that really helped me a lot. There's many other kind of business things, but this one is the one that I've gifted the most.
Mm-hmm.
Every time I get asked this question, somebody wants to hear some sort of, Nicole, are you like a sci-fi? I've had like this South by Southwest panels where like, what's your favorite sci-fi? I am not a super sci-fi person. I think, when I think about sci-fi, I think like I watched, E.T. many years ago, right? But for me, the book that I'm reading right now is Think Like a Monk. So the whole purpose of that book is really sort of self-discipline and really starting to use that discipline and applying it to your daily life to accomplish goals, and how that practice of sort of meditation really helps you be more focused.
Mm-hmm. Fantastic. I would answer, I think, for business, I think Venture Deals, if you're raising money, reading Venture Deals by Brad Feld is a great way to deconstruct a term sheet and really understand the whole process of raising money. It's a textbook. It's excellent. But I think about startup stories. I think The Hard Thing About Hard Things, Ben Horowitz. It's a fun story. It's a good one to read, and shows you just how much the venture investment environment has changed over the last 20 years. Okay, let's do a lightning round. Let's do some quick responses to this one, and just what advice do you have for new founders in the space industry? Let's start with you, Sir Martin, and let's try to maybe about a 30 seconds to a minute kind of.
Okay, well, the reason I chose the book that I suggested is because it's people that will create your business, and understanding human nature and how that interacts actually is at the core of it. So although that book may not tell you how to run a business, it will perhaps give you insight in a rather British way into human nature. And essentially, when you come back to your question, it's fine if you are fundamentally motivated and interested, fascinated in whatever it is that you're proposing. Mm-hmm. That will be the greatest ingredient for success.
Absolutely.
For me, I think the advice would be try it.
Yep. Try it.
And I'm a strong believer that 80% of failure that happens in big ideas is because people are not trying. Mm-hmm. It's not because of they're trying and they're failing. It's they're not trying. And I'm just a strong believer in the need for that, for the challenges that we see ahead of us, but also the opportunities ahead of us. So we depend on more people to just try it, build organizations that scale, and help such organizations, but also start new ones. Just try it.
Mm-hmm. If you don't ask, the answer is always no, right? So kind of building off that, what's the harm, right? I think a lot of these times, so many people are afraid to just ask the question or ask for that help or share their idea. if you don't share and it's stuck in your head, you're not moving anywhere. You're not getting it, moving it forward. So I'd say that, and then, again, one foot in front of the other. This is a long journey. It's nothing to happen overnight. So some of it is, your competitors. Some of it is who can take the most steps without stopping. So it's somewhat of an endurance game in terms of getting to the finish line.
Yep, who's in the best shape. My advice would be to think big. I think that, Bill Gates once said that we overestimate what we can do in a year and underestimate what we can do in 10 years. So it really pays to think big and expand the business plan and think bigger than what you originally, all of your kind of gut tells you to do. With that, we're running out of time. I want to give a shout out to Emma Loudon and the Astro Debates group tomorrow morning. So show up for Astro Debates. It's the second year of this event, and it's going to be a lot of fun. So this is what Ascend is all about. It's about learning, and so appreciate you being here today, and thank you to my panelists, and thanks for being here. So
Thank you.
appreciate it.